There's a lot of information out there about the history of runes, but if you're looking for a brief introduction that specifically focuses on the Elder Futhark runes, I think you'll find this video super helpful. So we'll talk a little bit about what runes are and give some cultural context. This is the Elder Futhark rune set, which is the one we're using today. But in general, runes are symbolic letters or symbols. So like in the American alphabet, the letter A doesn't really stand for anything. Type A blood is not any better than any other blood, but a grade A is a better grade. So the letter A isn't meaningful in and of itself. It just depends on where you're using it. But in the Elder Futhark runes, the letter A is actually this one right here, which is this green thing. Now to us, this looks like an F, but really this is the letter Ansuz, which means estuary, which is the place where the river meets the sea. And it represents communication and trade, because in the olden days, the boats would come down the river, and then the sea was where you would meet with trading ships from other countries. And it also has the connotation of like divine communication. Like, how is the world speaking to you? How is the divine whispering into your ear? And then what do you do to communicate that to others? So that's one of the cool things about runes, is that they are actually letters, but they are also symbolic. And because of that, they carry extra power. And that's true of many rune systems, like the Elder Futhark and the Younger Futhark are actually letters, but there are also runes like witches' runes, which are just symbols, and they have their own meaning. So really we're working with the symbolism of the rune. But just in case you're wondering whether it's actually a language, I have an example here. So runes were used as an alphabet, just like the alphabet we use today, to write a lot of different languages, Anglo-Saxon, Danish, Icelandic, and this is an example of what's called a rune stone. And this was discovered in Scandinavia. And what it says is, King Harold ordered these cumbles in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Thyra, his mother, that Harold who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. Now, I have to say that this particular symbolism actually, this particular meaning makes me think that he didn't really make these in memory of Gorm and his father and Thyra, his mother, because I have a feeling really this is in memory of King Harold himself. But if you look at it, you can kind of see the runes here. So can you see where my cursor is? There's this straight line, and then kind of the angled line. There's two of them right here, right? And that's this rune right here, which is the rune now Thes, which represents like need or necessity. So the point is, they really did use these to actually write languages, and you can write English words with them too, which is a cool thing to do. But we're looking at them from this sort of symbolic perspective. The earliest rune inscriptions that we have found come from about 160 CE. CE is the new version for AD, so after the birth of Jesus. And they were used for writing inscriptions all the way up until about the 1700s. There are 6 different rune alphabets. There's tons of languages. There's this example called the Ruthwell Cross, which has Anglo-Saxon and Latin that are all written in runes. So it was a working alphabet. There's a rune hoard found in a place in, I think it was Norway. And it has a whole bunch of messages on it. There's just a bunch of scraps of paper and wood and things with messages. And my favorite one was the one that said, "Warrior, warrior, warrior Maria," which I think might be about the Virgin Mary, or it might be just a super tough chick named Maria. But the point is, people were writing all kinds of regular stuff in runes as well. However, there is evidence in some of the literature of that time that they were also associated with charms and magic. And that dates from about the 1600s. I'm sorry, the 600s. It's not exactly clear what they were doing, but somehow runes were believed to have power. And it's also not clear whether this is something that was just done in literature or whether it was also actually something people did in real life. But they were certainly associated with power and symbolism and magic in the common conception, in addition to just being an everyday language that was written. The meanings that we have, like the ones that are on the PDF and the ones that I'm talking about today, really were standardized starting in the 1900s and then really clarified in the 1980s. And they are based on a bunch of poems from the 9th century that give the meanings for each of the runes. So it's kind of like their version of our old song, like A is for apple, B is for boy, except it's like A is for apple, which symbolizes nature's bounty. B is for boy, the little children that run in our yard. So they have these meanings for each of the runes. But the thing is that the poems don't all agree on the meanings for the runes. There's a little bit of divergence on what means what. So the meanings we're using now really are from the 20th century. And I think it's just important to note that we're modern people and we're using a historic system for our own purposes. And this is important to me because I feel like there's nothing wrong with using runes, whether or not you have any sort of European or British Isles background in your ancestry. Just the way that I don't think it's wrong for people in Asia to use English letters to write sigils or spells or whatever they want to do with it. But I also think it's important to know that we're not 100% sure exactly how runes were used by the people who used them back in the day. So some of what we do is based on accounts and what we can glean from their literature, but I don't want to say that, oh, this is how the Icelandic people in 1000 AD were using their runes to do such and such, because I really think we can take what they have and build on it, but I don't want to say that this is some like historical recreation. For thousands of years, runes have been used for divination purposes, because they sort of were, but the accounts are not that clear on how it works. What we do know, though, is that runes show up in art from this period. In fact, you can see they're all right here. This is a pendant, actually, a gold pendant that was unearthed in an archaeological dig. And there are the runes. So we've got Uruz right here. This one is Laguz, which represents a lake, and it's sort of like emotional connection and your subconscious. It's kind of like the moon card in tarot. And then we have our friend Ansu's here. So this is communication, divine communication. Actually, there's a nice swastika down here. The swastika was a symbol of abundance before the Nazis adopted it. Now, what we don't know about this pendant was whether these runes were put here for some sort of like ritual, spiritual, or magical reason. They could have been like, charms of power or designed to protect the wearer, or they might just be like the name of this guy. So it's hard to know whether they're magical or not in this application originally, but I still think this is pretty cool and beautiful.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The 3 runes that we're looking at now, they're facing the opposite way of what's on your PDF. Is it right? Can you flip that, or how does that work?
That's a good question. So there's something very interesting about sort of, and I'm going to say Western society because that's what I'm familiar with. But basically, I have a degree in the history of art. So this gets into the art history of looking at art from different cultures, right? So in Western culture, we are trained that letters should face a certain way, right? The lumps on the B go to the right. That's how you write a B. And people in other cultures didn't necessarily believe that. They didn't believe that the letters only could face a certain way, or that spelling had to be done. I mean, even back in Shakespeare's day, spelling was considered largely optional as long as it was phonetic. And if you look at ancient Egyptian art, actually, they thought that symmetrical art was the most important thing. So if there are inscriptions on 2 sides of a doorway, the left side, the inscription goes to the left, and on the right side, the inscription goes to the right, because they thought that symmetry was like the mark of the gods. So in general, we tend to write runes facing the way that they're facing on the PDF, which is, kind of the established way that we write them in the modern day. But you can actually write runes in any direction or any orientation. And if we get to the part today where we're talking about rune sigils, you'll see that runes often end up facing in opposite directions as part of rune sigil art. So from an artistic perspective, or for your own divination purposes, you can write them in any orientation that you want to. Now, there are some people who consider reversals in runes, like if you cast a rune and it ends up upside down, that has a different meaning. And when you make rune art, or you're doing sigils, you might decide to put the reversals in as part of the magical component, or you might just decide to arrange it however works well for you. So they didn't seem to have attach any importance to the way the rune was facing, but you get to decide if the way it's facing is meaningful for you in your own practice. One of the things I like about runes is that I find them to be very sort of clear and simple. I find that tarot gives a lot of information and runes often really help me clarify it. But I just wanted you to know that you are like empowered to think of the rune at whatever level of complexity you want. This is the rune Uruz. And you can see there's, I will say, by the way, that the Elder Futhark, the way they're written and the names vary slightly depending on the source you're looking at. We don't have any written sources that actually spell out the whole rune name that all agree. So there's some variation online. But Uruz relates to personal like strength. And the official meaning is the ox. And it's not the modern ox, which is strong enough. It's actually sort of the ancient ox. And this is an animal called the aurochs. And I picked up a picture of that. And you can see that's basically what it looked like. So it's kind of like if you imagine a Texas Longhorn cattle that is higher at the shoulder than 6 feet. They were absolutely immense, and they were a great mainstay of the Neolithic hunters. So it's not like a regular ox that's like domesticated in your paddock. It's like the ox of power, the essential ox of power. And so one way to think about runes is just to think about what they represent, like this giant, powerful beast who could, feed the entire camp for a year, for the winter. And let the power of the symbolism come into you. And then just go from there. What does that mean to you, the power of the ox in this reading? But if you want to, you also can take any other perspective on the runes that seems meaningful to you. So I just thought I'd illustrate what this is. And this is one of those moments where if this is too confusing for you, feel free to ignore it and do the simple thing. But if there's something in here that you really are inspired by, then I invite you to pursue this aspect of runes. So this is a rune called Perthro. You can see it's got a straight back, and then there's like 2 little V's here. It represents the P sound, Perthro. And the literal meaning of it is it's a dice cup. So if you think of in the days, they gambled with the cup rattling around the dice. This is the cup with all the dice in it. And from a mythological standpoint, it represents the well of the weird, which is like the well of fate in the Norse religions. I'm not an expert in Norse religion, so if anybody wants to gainsay what I say about these, feel free to chime in. So that's the literal meaning. And from there, you can generate the physical meanings: fate, taking a chance, the unknown potential of the womb, right? Like the dice rattling around in the cup. It's like you don't even know what the roll of the dice is going to be. The same thing, the baby in the womb is about to be born. We don't know what that life is going to look like. But you can also work with psychological meanings, like investigating the undiscovered. That would be the psychological idea of the dice and the cup that are yet to be rolled. And then there's also metaphysical, spiritual meanings to embrace the unknown that the universe has for you. Somebody asked a question earlier about like, will my life settle down, or is it going to be unstable and take a lot of years to create stability for myself? And you might be feeling like those dice in the cup, like you're rattling around and you're like, I'm ready to be rolled, so at least I know what I'm dealing with. And if you draw a Perthro, that might say, you've got to get used to the unknown. You've got to get used to being the dice in the cup before the roll. So I'm just inviting you here, instead of thinking, oh, what do the runes mean? Well, how am I supposed to use them? Well, I got to get this right, which I think cuts off our connection with our intuition and with spirit. It's really about reaching into the runes, right? Leveraging that connection we asked for in the grounding, and ask, what part of the runes is really speaking to me today?
I remember this game that I have, and it's a pirate dice game, and you put your dice, every player puts their dice into their little cup and they shake it, and then only you can see what you have. Now the point is, you lie to the other players,
right?
And the other players have to guess if you're lying. Well, if I had and I read tarot first and foremost, so if I had my spread out and I got Perthro, I would think eliminating people in your life that you feel may be literally lying to you, or even though they love you, are misguiding you. Mm-hmm. So the way that I would read in that reading Perthro, because I'm thinking of this game I have upstairs, that's really cute little pirate game, but that's exactly what I should be thinking of in that moment for that rune with that tarot question and those tarot cards. And the next time I draw Perth Row, I might be thinking of whales in the ocean, and I will find a meaning for that with whales in the ocean. But so it's more to saying, like, when using your intuition, because I've just started working with the runes, that I'm using my intuition a lot with the runes because I can't remember all of their meanings. So I'm just letting it kind of come to me. But I am definitely looking at Robin's PDFs, which are out of this world. There's so much knowledge there. I'm definitely looking at those every day too.
Good.
So I just thought that was so cute. And I thought it was so cool that you had Perth Row, because that's the one I was thinking of earlier. It's like, oh, I got to share my pirate dice story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the game. If anybody has watched the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, I think it's the second one where they play that game for Will's soul. That's the one they're all sitting around playing that game, the Liar's Dice.